This is a lunge. This is a hip flexor stretch. There's a difference. Yesterday I was correcting somebody's kind of foot position, their back foot position, or really their knee position when they were in a lunge. They were back in pretty deep extension of this trailing leg, and I just moved them up just so they were more in this position, kind of a more 90-90 with those legs. And then later in the workout they asked, why did I do that? So my first response, which was my honest response, but also probably a little bit snarky and required a little bit more explanation, I said that this position is a stretch, not an exercise movement. So breaking that down a little bit more, what exactly are you looking for in a lunge when you're doing it in a workout versus kind of a lunge position when you're warming up and or stretching and or working on the hip flexor? So we'll just use an alternating forward lunge as the example to sort of demonstrate the difference between what a lunge ideally looks like and what you're working when you're doing it as an exercise movement versus using the lunge shape and position for sort of a warm-up stretch position. So we'll use an alternating forward lunge just to demonstrate. As you step yourself out, you want to get your front leg to about 90 degrees, back leg to about 90 degrees, torso is tall and upright. The front leg is the working leg in this position. So from here, as I push myself back, that's when you get the glute and hamstring engagement coming back to your starting position. Step yourself out again, and you alternate side to side. So as you step out into an alternating forward lunge, you want to get the front leg to 90 degrees and that back leg to 90 degrees. Torso is tall and upright. A good way to think of it is stacking the shoulders on top of the knee of that back leg. You basically want to have a straight line there. What I see most often is people getting into really deep extension of that trailing leg. So my main issue with that, like I said, is that that's really a stretch. Also, that longer position, you tend to be splitting the load evenly between the front leg and the trailing leg, when really you want 60-70% of the load in any lunge that you're doing for an exercise movement. You want that to be loaded into the front leg. Back leg is really just there for stability, balance, proprioception, while the front leg is actually the working leg. So when you go into a long lunge position, that extended back leg, and you really feel it in the hip flexor, you're kind of distributing the load where it shouldn't be. You're kind of splitting the load between the front and the back leg when you should be biased towards that front leg. And then I've heard people make the argument, yeah, but if you leave the back leg extended, you get more glute and hamstring engagement. So I don't really care for that argument, because if you're doing alternating forward lunges, when you push yourself out of that front leg to get back to a standing position, your hips are in flexion, or the hip on the side of that front leg, that side of the hip is in flexion. What do you need to recruit to get the hip back up to extension? Glutes and hamstrings. So you're still working the glutes and hamstrings, and you can do it from a normal lunge position. You should be working primarily the front leg when you're doing a lunge. So you need to be able to differentiate between exercise lunge versus long lunge stretching position, because they're very different. You don't want to end up in a stretching position when you're loaded up with a barbell, dumbbell, sandbag, whatever it might be. You don't need, you can stretch your hip flexors with your body weight. You don't need to be loading that position and putting yourself in this really vulnerable position by adding extra weight to a position that should be done pretty much just unloaded. So it's worth checking out your lunge position next time you're doing them in a mirror, have somebody videotape you, see where you're tracking with the front and back knee, see if you're getting to 90 in the front, 90 in the back, and you also want to check the torso position. Are you tall and upright? Are you stacked over that back knee, or do you tend to be too far forward? If your chest tends to be forward, there's a good chance that back leg is out in extension, because when you get to this long lunge position, it's much easier to have the chest go forward. If you try to keep yourself tall and upright with that back leg extended behind you, you get a huge stretch of the hip flexor. So a lot of times people just dump the torso forward and be like, this is my lunge position. How's it look, coach? Not great. Get the legs to 90 degrees, torso tall and upright.